Princess Seraph walked through the grand hall of the Galactic Council Station with her head held high. Her purple robes flowed behind her as she moved, and the crystal crown on her head caught the light from 1,000 stars visible through the massive windows. Everyone who saw her bowed or stepped aside. This was how things should be. She was royalty after all, and her empire controlled half the known galaxy. The station was filled with representatives from dozens of species. Some looked like giant insects, others like walking trees, and some were just clouds of gas in containment suits. Seraph had met them all before. Most were boring. All of them treated her with the respect she deserved. She was here for another tedious council meeting about trade routes and territorial disputes. Her father, the Emperor, had sent her to represent their people. It was supposed to be an honor, but Seraph found these meetings dull. The same arguments, the same compromises, the same pretending that other species mattered as much as the Valkyrians. As she entered the reception area, she noticed the refreshment table had stopped working. The force field that kept the drinks at the right temperature was flickering. Several delegates were complaining. The station staff looked worried and confused. Then she saw him. A human male in dirty work clothes was kneeling beside the table, his hands covered in grease. He had a toolkit spread out on the polished floor, completely unconcerned about the mess. His brown hair was messy, and he had a smudge of oil on his cheek. He looked young, maybe in his late 20s, and entirely focused on his work. Seraph had heard of humans. They were a new species to the Council, barely a decade since first contact. Primitive compared to most galactic civilizations. They had only just developed faster than light travel when the Council found them. The fact that they even had a seat at the Council was surprising to many. The human muttered something to himself and twisted something inside the mechanism. The force field stabilized immediately. The drinks stopped flickering. He stood up, wiped his hands on a rag, and gave a casual thumbs up to the nearest delegate. "All fixed," he said with a smile. "Should work fine now." The delegate, a towering Borkesh warrior with 4 arms, simply grunted and walked away. The human started packing up his tools, still smiling to himself. Seraph found herself walking toward him. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was curiosity about this new species. Maybe it was boredom. Or maybe it was because he was the only person in the room who hadn't even glanced at her when she entered. "You are part of the human delegation?" she asked, her voice carrying the authority she'd been trained to use since childhood. The human looked up at her and smiled. It wasn't the nervous smile she usually got from lesser species. It was genuine and warm. "Sort of," he said. "I'm Jake Morrison. I fix things mostly. Came along to keep the equipment running." He closed his toolkit and stood up fully. He was tall for a human, she noted, though still shorter than her by a few inches. "You are a technician then," Seraph said. It wasn't a question. It was obvious what he was. "Apprentice, technically," Jake said with a self-deprecating shrug. "Still learning the finer points of alien technology. Your people's force field systems are beautiful, by the way. The way the energy matrices interlock is really elegant." Seraph blinked. An apprentice knew about Valkyrian energy matrices? That was unexpected. Their technology was considered among the most advanced in the galaxy. "You understand our systems?" she asked. "Just the basics," Jake said, waving his hand dismissively. "Enough to fix simple problems. The real experts would laugh at me." Before Seraph could respond, a commotion erupted across the hall. A massive creature, easily 8 feet tall with gray armored skin and claws like swords, was shouting at a smaller delegate. The voice was deep and angry, each word a growl. "You insult my people with your lies," the creature roared. Seraph recognized him immediately. Krelix, a Thronax warrior. The Thronax were one of the most feared species in the galaxy, apex predators from a high-gravity death world. They were stronger and more aggressive than almost any other species. They had a reputation for violence, and had only joined the Council after decades of wars proved that no one could defeat them completely. The smaller delegate, some kind of amphibian species, was backing away in terror. Krelix advanced. His claws extended. Several security officers started moving toward them, but everyone knew they couldn't stop a thrown axe if he decided to attack. The best they could do was try to contain the damage. Sarah felt a touch of fear herself. She had psychic powers that most species lacked, but even her abilities would struggle against a thrown axe in close combat. Their minds were shielded by pure rage and instinct. She noticed Jake setting down his toolkit calmly. Then, to her complete shock, he started walking toward Krelix. "He's going to get himself killed," Sarah whispered to herself, but Jake didn't look afraid. He walked with steady purpose, not running, not hesitating. As he got closer, he called out in a language that sounded like rocks grinding together mixed with deep growls. Krelix's head snapped toward Jake. For a moment, Seraph was certain she was about to witness a human being torn apart. The thrown axe turned fully toward Jake, his claws still extended, his massive chest heaving with anger. Jake said something else in that grinding language. His voice was calm but firm. The impossible happened. Krelix's claws slowly retracted. The massive warrior's posture changed, his shoulders dropping slightly. He responded in his own language, the words shorter and less aggressive. Jake replied, gesturing with his hands in a way that seemed meaningful. He pointed to the small delegate, then to the room around them, then back to Krelix. He was explaining something, but doing it in a way that didn't sound like lecturing or ordering. After a long moment, Krelix huffed out a breath that might have been agreement or resignation. He turned away from the frightened delegate and walked toward the exit. But before he left, he placed one massive clawed hand on Jake's shoulder. It should have been crushing, but Jake just stood there calmly. Krelix rumbled something that almost sounded respectful, then left. The entire hall was silent. Everyone had witnessed what just happened, but no one could quite believe it. A thrown axe warrior had backed down. They never backed down. Their entire culture was built on dominance and strength. Jake turned and walked back toward his toolkit as if nothing unusual had happened. He picked it up and started heading toward a side exit. Sarah found herself following him, her curiosity now burning bright. She caught up to him in a quieter corridor. "What did you do?" she demanded. Jake looked at her with surprise, as if he'd forgotten she was there. "Oh," just reminded Krell that this wasn't the place for that kind of thing. He was upset about some trade negotiation. Valid concerns, actually, but he was going about it the wrong way. "You speak thrown axe," Seraph said. It wasn't a question, but her tone demanded explanation. "A bit," Jake admitted. "Picked it up a while back. Nice guy once you get to know him. He's just got a temper." "Nice?" Seraph repeated the word as if it was in a foreign language. "He is thrown axe. They are killing machines." Jake looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was something in his eyes, something that made her feel like he was seeing more than she was showing. "Everyone's more than their reputation, Princess," he said quietly. "Even apex predators have their reasons for things. You just have to listen." "How did you know who I am?" Seraph asked. Jake's smile returned. "The crown kind of gives it away. Plus, Captain Grant briefed us on all the important delegates. You're Princess Seraph Velkara. Your psychic abilities are supposed to be incredible." "They are," Seraph said automatically, then felt foolish for needing to assert it. "I'm sure they are." Jake agreed without any trace of mockery. "Listen, I need to go check on some environmental systems in Sector 7. Was nice meeting you, Princess." He gave her a small nod that might have been respectful or might have just been casual, then walked away down the corridor. Seraph stood there, watching him go. An apprentice technician who spoke thrown axe, who made an apex predator back down with just words, who fixed Valkyrian technology and treated a princess like she was just another person. Something wasn't right here. Something didn't fit, and for the first time in years, Princess Seraph felt genuinely curious about someone. She made a mental note to find out more about this Jake Morrison. She had a feeling he was much more than he appeared to be. Over the next 2 days, Sarah found herself watching Jake Morrison whenever she saw him. It wasn't difficult. He seemed to be everywhere on the station, always fixing something, or helping someone. She told herself it was just curiosity about this strange human, nothing more. She watched him repair a door panel while chatting easily with a Slith diplomat. The Esith were serpent-like creatures, known for their intelligence networks and paranoid nature. They trusted almost no one. Yet there was Jake, making the creature laugh at some joke while his hands worked on the complex wiring. She saw him in the cafeteria, eating something that looked like it came from Earth. He sat with a group that included a junior Krygon officer, 2 station maintenance workers, and what appeared to be a delivery pilot. They were all different species, all lower-ranked members of their delegations. Jake fit right in with them, sharing stories and listening to theirs. Seraph decided to use her resources. As a princess, she had access to most databases in the galaxy. She started searching for information about Jake Morrison. What she found was frustratingly vague. He was listed as a civilian specialist, attached to the human diplomatic mission. His education records showed he'd studied engineering and xenolinguistics, but many of the details were restricted. His work history had gaps, periods where there was no information at all. She brought her findings to Ambassador Zixthara, the Slith diplomat she'd seen talking with Jake. Zixthara had a reputation for knowing everything about everyone. "Ah, the human technician," Zixthara said, her forked tongue flickering with what might have been amusement. "You are curious about him, Princess? I want to understand what I'm dealing with," Seraph said carefully. "His records are incomplete. Human records often are," Zixthara replied. "They are a young species, but not a stupid one. They understand the value of secrets." "What do you know about him?" Seraph pressed. The ambassador's eyes, all 3 of them, focused on Seraph with unsettling intensity. "I know that many apex predators seem to already know him. I know that he speaks languages he should not speak. I know that your own people's nobles treat him with unusual respect for a mere technician." She paused. "I know that appearances can be very deceiving, Princess. Perhaps you should ask yourself why you are so interested in this particular human." Seraph left the conversation feeling more confused than before. She decided to take a more direct approach. That evening, there was a cultural exchange dinner. Different species brought food and entertainment from their home worlds. It was supposed to help build understanding between civilizations. Seraph attended out of duty, expecting another boring evening. She maneuvered to sit at a table near where the human delegation was seated. Jake was there, wearing clean clothes for once, though still simple compared to everyone else's formal wear. He was talking with Captain Lisa Grant, the head of the human delegation. Seraph activated her subtle listening devices, technology that could pick up conversations across a crowded room. She aimed them at the human table. "The negotiations tomorrow will be tricky," Captain Grant was saying. "The Krygon are being stubborn about the mining rights." "They have legitimate concerns," Jake replied. "Their colony ships are already in that sector. Just because we found the asteroid belt first doesn't mean we should ignore their claim. The Council rules say first discovery grants initial rights," another human at the table pointed out. Jake shook his head. "Rules are important, but relationships matter more. If we push too hard on this, we'll make enemies we don't need. Better to share the resources and make an ally." Captain Grant looked at Jake with an expression that seemed almost like deference. As Jake explained his ideas, Seraph noticed something interesting. The captain was listening to him like he was the one in charge, not her. The other humans at the table were nodding along, taking his suggestions seriously. This wasn't how apprentices were treated. She was so focused on watching them that she almost missed when someone sat down next to her. She turned to find Dr. Helen Torres, another member of the human delegation. The woman was listed as a xenobiologist. "Princess Seraph," Helen said with a warm smile. "I hope you don't mind me joining you. I've been hoping to learn more about Valkyrian culture." Seraph gave a polite smile. "Of course. They talked for a while about various cultural topics. Helen was intelligent and asked good questions. Sarah found herself actually enjoying the conversation. Then Helen casually mentioned Jake. "I see you've met Jake," Helen said. "He's quite good at making connections with people, isn't he?" "He is unusual," Sarah admitted carefully. For an apprentice technician, Helen's smile grew a bit wider. "Jake is unusual for a lot of reasons. He has a gift for understanding people, understanding what they need." She paused. "Tell me, Princess, on your world, do you have people who are more than they seem? People who work quietly behind the scenes to make things happen?" "Of course," Seraph said. "Every civilization has such people." "Then perhaps you understand that sometimes the most important people are the ones who don't demand attention," Helen said. She stood up gracefully. "Enjoy your evening, Princess. And don't judge books by their covers. I believe that's an Earth saying." After Helen left, Seraph sat thinking about that conversation. She looked over at Jake again. He was now talking with the Krygon officer she'd seen him with before. The Krygon was laughing at something Jake said. Krygon rarely laughed. They were almost as fierce as the Thronax. The next day brought the emergency drill. The station ran them regularly to keep everyone prepared for disasters. Alarms blared, and automated voices directed people to evacuation points. Seraph followed the protocols, moving with her guards toward the designated safe zone. But she kept watching Jake. She saw him immediately head not toward safety, but toward the command center. She saw Commander Kyle Peters, who was supposedly Jake's superior officer, actually ask Jake what they should do. "Make sure the civilian sectors are evacuated first," Jake was saying. "Check the environmental systems in sections 3 and 7. Those have been having issues." Peters nodded and started giving orders that were really Jake's suggestions. Other station personnel were listening to Jake too, taking his advice without question. Then the real crisis hit. An explosion rocked the station. Not a drill. An actual emergency. A cargo ship had collided with the station's outer hull, breaching one of the civilian sections. Chaos erupted. Alarms changed pitch. People were screaming and running. Seraph's guards tried to pull her toward safety, but she resisted. She wanted to see what would happen. She wanted to see what Jake would do. She watched him transform. The casual, friendly technician disappeared. His expression became focused and calm. He moved with quick efficiency, organizing people, directing the response. He grabbed emergency equipment and headed toward the breach site. Sarah followed, ignoring her guards' protests. She was a princess, but she was also trained in combat and crisis management. She wouldn't hide while others were in danger. She reached the damaged section to find Jake coordinating a rescue team. The team included 3 Thronax warriors, 2 human security officers, and several station personnel. All of them were taking orders from Jake without question. "The breach is in compartment 47B, Jake was saying, studying a data pad. "Life support is failing. We have maybe 10 minutes before everyone in there is dead. Standard evacuation routes are blocked by debris. We cut through?" one of the Thronax suggested, flexing his claws. "Too slow," Jake said. "We'll use the maintenance tunnels. They run parallel to the main corridors." He looked at the group. "It's going to be tight, and there's going to be fire and possible structural collapse. Anyone who doesn't want to risk it." "I understand." No one moved to leave. They all looked at Jake like he was someone they would follow anywhere. They moved into the tunnels. Sarah followed, staying back enough not to interfere. The tunnels were dark and filled with smoke. She could hear the groaning of damaged metal. It sounded like the station was tearing itself apart. Jake led them through the maze of passages with absolute confidence. He seemed to know exactly where he was going, despite the darkness and confusion. When they reached a junction blocked by debris, he found an alternate route without hesitation. They burst into compartment 47B from an access panel. Inside were about 20 civilians, various species, all terrified and choking on smoke. Some were injured. "Everyone stay calm," Jake called out in multiple languages. Seraph counted at least 5 different languages he switched between, making sure everyone understood. "We're getting you out. Follow these officers to the evacuation route. Move quickly, but don't panic." He helped carry an injured Velkarian noble, supporting the man's weight easily despite the smoke and heat. Seraph recognized the noble as Lord Saren, a high-ranking member of her father's court. As they evacuated the civilians, a secondary explosion rocked the compartment. Part of the ceiling collapsed. Jake shoved 2 civilians out of the way, taking the impact of falling debris himself. He went down hard. The Thronax warriors immediately moved to help him. They pulled the debris off with their massive strength. Jake stood up, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, his arm hanging at an odd angle. "I'm fine," he said, though clearly he wasn't. "Get these people out. I'll follow." "You're injured," Seraph heard herself say. She had moved closer without thinking. Jake looked at her with surprise. "Princess, you shouldn't be here." "Neither should you, with those injuries," she shot back. A small smile crossed his face despite the pain. "Yeah, well, job's not done yet. They got everyone out." Jake was the last to leave, making sure no one was left behind. Only when they reached safety did he finally let someone treat his injuries. A medic quickly set his dislocated shoulder. Jake barely flinched. Lord Saren approached, bowing his head to Jake. "You saved my life, Morrison. I am in your debt." Jake waved it off with his good hand. "Just doing what needed doing. Glad you're safe." But Seraph noticed how Lord Saren looked at Jake. It was the look someone gave to an equal, not to a mere technician. It was respect, genuine and deep. After things calmed down, Seraph finally cornered Commander Peters. "Tell me the truth," she demanded, using her royal authority. "What is Jake Morrison really?" Peters looked uncomfortable. "Princess, I don't have clearance to—" "I don't care about clearance," Seraph interrupted. "I just watched him lead a rescue mission like he was born to do it. I watched apex predators follow his orders without question. Tell me what he is." Peters sighed. "He's listed as a civilian specialist for a reason, Princess. That's all I can say. If you want more, you'll have to ask him directly." That night, Seraph lay in her quarters, thinking about everything she'd seen. Jake Morrison spoke languages he shouldn't know. He commanded respect from species that gave respect to no one. He led rescue missions with the skill of a trained military officer. He fixed technology, negotiated disputes, and made apex predators back down. What kind of apprentice could do all that? The answer was obvious. No apprentice could, which meant Jake Morrison was lying about who and what he was. The question was why, and what was he really? The next morning, Seraph used her highest level of security clearance. As a crown princess, she had access to databases that most people didn't even know existed. She searched for Jake Morrison again, this time digging deeper. Most of his file was still restricted, but she found something. A mission report from 5 years ago. Before humanity had even joined the Galactic Council, the report was heavily redacted, with most details blacked out. But certain words jumped out at her. First contact scenario. Hostile situation. Commander Morrison. And negotiated peaceful resolution. Commander. Not apprentice. Not technician. Commander. She kept searching and found references to other missions. Again, most details were hidden, but a pattern emerged. Jake Morrison had been involved in multiple first contact situations with species throughout the frontier regions. Some of those species were known as extremely dangerous. All of the missions had ended without major conflict. Seraph sat back, her mind racing. Jake wasn't just pretending to be an apprentice. He was actively hiding his real role. But why? What purpose did it serve? Her thoughts were interrupted by an announcement. The council was convening for the main negotiation session. The territorial disputes that had brought everyone here would finally be addressed. She made her way to the Grand Council chamber. The room was enormous, with seating arranged in a circle so that no species appeared more important than another. Well, that was the theory anyway. Everyone knew which species really held power. The negotiations began with the usual formal speeches. Representatives from various species stated their positions on the disputed territories. The frontier regions of space were rich in resources, and everyone wanted a piece. Then War Chief Draknor stood up. The leader of the Krygon delegation was even more imposing than Krelix. He stood nearly 9 feet tall, with dark red scales and eyes that glowed like hot coals. The Krygon were reptilian warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds. Their empire was built on strength and honor through combat. "The Krygon Dominion will not yield our claim," Draknor announced, his voice like thunder. "We have colonized the disputed sector. We have bled for it. It is ours by right of conquest." Several other delegations protested. The room erupted into arguments. Seraph watched as the council arbiter tried to restore order. Captain Lisa Grant stood up from the human section. "We request a recess to consider our position." The arbiter granted it. Everyone filed out of the chamber for a break. Seraph watched the human delegation gather in a side room. She positioned herself where she could observe them through the transparent walls. Captain Grant was speaking urgently to Jake. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see the body language. The captain was asking for something, and Jake was reluctant. Finally, he nodded. When the council reconvened, something unexpected happened. Captain Grant stood and said, "The human delegation requests permission for civilian specialist Jake Morrison to address the council." A murmur went through the chamber. It was unusual for anyone other than official delegates to speak at these negotiations. The arbiter looked uncertain, but finally agreed. Jake stood and walked to the center of the circular chamber. He looked small down there. Just one human surrounded by hundreds of aliens, many of them much larger and more powerful than him. Seraph expected protests. She expected other delegations to object to this breach of protocol. Instead, something strange happened. War Chief Draknor, who had been about to walk out, slowly sat back down. His glowing eyes fixed on Jake with an intensity that should have been terrifying. Krelix, sitting in the Thronax section, leaned forward with interest. Several other apex predator species representatives were doing the same. They were all watching Jake like he was something important, something that demanded attention. Jake began to speak. "Honored delegates, I know I'm not supposed to be here. I'm just a technician, after all." He said it with a slight smile that made Seraph think he was making a joke she didn't understand. "But I've spent time in the frontier regions. I've seen what these territorial disputes look like from the ground level." He started telling a story. He spoke about Earth's history, about how different groups of humans had once fought over territory and resources. He talked about predators and prey, about ecosystems and balance. "On my world," Jake said, "we had many apex predators. Big cats, bears, wolves, even humans ourselves. These predators competed for the same territories, the same food sources. The competition was fierce. Many species went extinct because they couldn't adapt." Seraph listened, fascinated despite herself. Where was he going with this? "But here's the interesting part," Jake continued. "The predators that survived weren't always the biggest or the strongest. They were the ones who learned that territory isn't just about dominance. It's about sustainability. It's about understanding that sometimes sharing a hunting ground makes more sense than fighting over it." He turned to face Draknor directly. Then Jake did something that shocked everyone in the room. He spoke in perfect Krygon, using what Seraph's translator identified as ancient ceremonial dialect. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was respectful, but firm, acknowledging strength while suggesting wisdom. Draknor's eyes widened. He responded in the same ancient dialect, asking something. Jake answered. And then he did something even more shocking. He referenced specific events from Krygan history. He talked about the Battle of Seven Suns, where the Krygan had faced an enemy they couldn't defeat through force alone. He spoke about how the great Krygan warchief of that era had chosen strategic alliance over glorious defeat. Your people have a saying, Jake continued in the common galactic language so others could understand. Victory through wisdom is greater than victory through blood. The strongest warrior is the one who wins without fighting. Sarah felt her breath catch. Those were sacred words to the Krygan. How did Jake know them? More importantly, how did he dare speak them in this context? Draknor stood slowly. The entire chamber fell silent. Everyone expected an explosion of rage. The Krygan didn't appreciate outsiders quoting their sacred texts. Instead, Draknor spoke in a measured tone. You speak words that few outsiders know, Morrison human. Where did you learn the ancient tongue of my people? From someone I respect greatly, Jake replied. A Krygan war leader who taught me that true strength isn't about proving dominance in every situation. It's about knowing when to fight and when to build. Draknor studied Jake for a long moment. Then he did something that made Seraph's jaw drop. He gave Jake a Krygan salute. A gesture of respect between warriors of equal standing. You carry the scent of worthy hunt, Draknor said, using a phrase that Seraph's translator struggled with. It was a Krygan concept that didn't translate well, something about recognizing someone as a respected opponent or honored equal. The Krygan Dominion will continue negotiations, Draknor announced. But I request that Morrison Human be present at the discussion table. His perspective would be valuable. Other delegations started nodding in agreement. Even species that normally opposed anything the Krygan wanted were agreeing. They all wanted Jake at the negotiation table. The session adjourned for the day. As delegates filed out, Seraph noticed many of them approaching Jake. Apex predators who normally wouldn't give a human the time of day were shaking his hand, talking with him, treating him like an equal. She cornered her advisor, Elder Seer Miranda, who had been watching everything with her ancient, knowing eyes. What just happened? Seraph demanded. Miranda smiled, a rare expression on her weathered face. You witnessed something rare, child. You saw apex predators recognize one of their own. But he's human, Seraph protested. They're a young species. They're barely even spacefaring. Young, yes. Miranda agreed. But consider this, Princess. Humanity comes from a death world. Their planet had gravity, temperature, extremes, predators, diseases, and countless other threats. They survived not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they were adaptable, because they learned to work together, because they became the apex predator, not through physical superiority, but through intelligence and cooperation. Seraph shook her head. That still doesn't explain Jake. He's one human. How does he command such respect? Have you ever considered, Miranda said softly, that perhaps you've been looking at this backwards? You assumed Jake Morrison was pretending to be more than an apprentice. What if he's actually pretending to be less than he really is? Those words haunted Seraph for the rest of the day. She used every resource at her disposal to dig deeper into Jake's background. She finally found a contact, someone who had served on a frontier outpost years ago. The contact was a Borkesh merchant who had worked in the frontier regions. When Seraph mentioned Jake Morrison's name, the merchant's 4 eyes widened. Morrison human? The merchant said. I know that name. He came to our station during the 3-way crisis. What crisis? Seraph asked. 5 years ago, in the Theta sector, the merchant explained. 3 apex predator species, all claimed the same system. Thronax, Krygan, and the Vorkesh swarm. All 3 had ships in the system. All 3 refused to back down. We thought there would be war. What happened? The humans sent a small expedition, just 1 ship. The other species thought they were prey, coming to be eaten. But then this one human, Morrison, he went to each species alone. He met with their leaders, ate with them, hunted with them, fought with them. By the end of 2 months, all 3 species had agreed to share the system. The merchant leaned closer. I was there. I saw him with the Thronax war pack. They accepted him as packmate, something they never do with outsiders. I saw him face a Krygon champion in ritual combat and fight him to a standstill. I saw him navigate Vorkesh swarm politics, which even we don't fully understand. He turned enemies into allies. Seraph felt cold. What is he? What's his real position? Officially, I don't know, the merchant said. But unofficially, he's what humans call a bridge builder. Someone who goes into impossible situations and makes them possible. Someone who speaks the language of apex predators because he is one, just a different kind. That night, Seraph couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Jake. About how he'd saved Lord Saren without hesitation. About how he'd calmed Krelix with just words. About how Draknor had saluted him. She thought about the way he'd looked at her that first day, when she'd called the Thronax killing machines. The expression in his eyes that she hadn't understood then, but was beginning to understand now. It hadn't been fear or submission. It had been patience. Like he was waiting for her to figure something out. The next day, she did something she'd never done before. She went looking for Jake. Not as a princess investigating a mystery, but as someone who wanted answers directly from the source. She found him in one of the observation lounges, looking out at the stars. He was alone, holding a cup of something hot. His posture relaxed. Jake Morrison, she said, walking up beside him. He turned and smiled. Princess Seraph. Can't sleep? Either? I've been investigating you, she said bluntly. His smile didn't fade. You're not an apprentice, she stated. No, he agreed simply. What are you really? She asked. Jake looked back out at the stars. That's complicated. Officially, I'm a civilian specialist in first contact scenarios. Unofficially, he paused. I'm someone who helps species understand each other. Someone who tries to prevent wars before they start. You've been hiding who you are, Seraph said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement. Yes, Jake said, still looking at the stars. I've been hiding who I am. There are good reasons for that. Gone. Seraph moved to stand beside him. Tell me. Jake took a sip of his drink before answering. When humanity first entered the galactic community, we were scared. We'd found all these advanced civilizations, these powerful species who could crush us without thinking. We had 2 choices: appear weak and hope for mercy, or appear strong and invite challenges. So you chose to appear weak, Seraph said. We chose to appear unremarkable, Jake corrected. Not weak. Just not threatening. Let other species underestimate us while we learned everything we could about galactic politics, technology, culture. It gave us time to find our place. And you? What's your role in this? Jake smiled, but it was a tired smile. I'm what happens when you take a human who's good at reading people and put him in situations where reading people means the difference between peace and war. I've been doing this for 8 years now. Building relationships with apex predator species, showing them that humans can be trusted, that we understand the rules of their worlds. The Theta Sector incident, Seraph said. I heard about it. You prevented a war between 3 species. I got lucky, Jake said. And I had help. But yeah, that's what I do. I go to places where humans aren't welcome and make them welcome. I speak languages no human should speak and earn respect no human should have. He paused. It's exhausting, if I'm being honest. Before Seraph could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. Not drill alarms, real emergency warnings. The lights shifted to red, and the automated voice announced a security breach. Jake's entire demeanor changed instantly. The tired, friendly man, vanished. His eyes sharpened, his body tensed, and he was moving before Seraph could even process what was happening. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice carrying command authority she'd never heard from him before. "I'm coming with you," Seraph said firmly. Jake looked at her, seemed to evaluate her in a single glance, and nodded. They ran through the corridors. Jake spoke into a communication device, coordinating with station security. Seraph heard the rapid exchange of information. Terrorists, the Liberation Front. Multiple explosive devices. Hostages taken. The Liberation Front was a radical group composed of various prey species. They believed apex predators had dominated the galaxy for too long. Their methods were extreme, and they'd been responsible for several attacks over the past year. "Where are the hostages?" Jake asked into his comm. "Council Chamber 7, came the reply. "They've got at least 30 delegates trapped, including War Chief Draknor." Jake cursed under his breath. Of course they targeted him. Status of the terrorists? At least 10 armed subjects. They're demanding the Council expel all apex predator species, or they'll start executing hostages. They reached a security station where Commander Kyle Peters was organizing a response team. When Peters saw Jake, he immediately stepped aside. "What do we have?" Jake asked, looking at the security displays. 10 confirmed terrorists. Could be more, Peters reported. They've barricaded themselves in Chamber 7 with the hostages. Explosive devices rigged at the entrances. Standard security teams can't breach without casualties. Jake studied the displays, his mind clearly working through scenarios. "Get me Lieutenant Ben Shaw. And his team. I also want any Thronax security on the station. Tell them it's Jake Morrison requesting." Within minutes, a team assembled. Ben Shaw arrived with 4 human special operations soldiers. 3 Thronax security officers appeared, including one Seraph recognized as being from Krellix's personal guard. "Morrison human," the lead Thronax acknowledged with a nod of respect. Jake quickly outlined a plan. It was complex, involving multiple entry points, precise timing, and split-second coordination. Seraph watched as every member of the team listened, without question. These were trained warriors, apex predators, and elite soldiers. All of them treated Jake like their commander. "What about me?" Seraph asked. Everyone turned to look at her. Jake studied her for a moment. "Can you use your psychic abilities to sense the terrorists' positions inside? Give us a map of where everyone is?" Seraph nodded. Her people's psychic gifts were powerful, though using them at range through walls would be challenging. "Then you're with me," Jake said. "Everyone else, get into position. We go in 5 minutes." They moved through the maintenance passages, the same type Jake had used during the hull breach rescue. The team moved with silent efficiency. Seraph reached out with her mind, sensing the life forces inside the chamber. 32 hostages, she whispered to Jake. 10 armed terrorists spread throughout the room. 3 near the main entrance, 2 watching the hostages, 5 positioned around the chamber. Jake nodded, relaying the information to his team through hand signals. They reached their entry point, an access panel in the ceiling above the chamber. Jake looked at his team, then at his chronometer. 60 seconds, he mouthed. Seraph's heart was pounding. She'd been trained in combat like all Velkarian royalty. But this was different. This was real. Lives depended on what happened in the next few minutes. Jake counted down with his fingers. 5, 4, 3, 2. They breached. Everything happened fast. The team dropped into the chamber in perfect coordination. The Thronax security officers went straight for the terrorists near the hostages, their natural speed and strength overwhelming the attackers before they could react. Jake and Ben Shaw's team moved like they shared one mind, each covering the other, advancing on the remaining terrorists with practiced precision. Seraph watched in awe as Jake disarmed one terrorist, disabled another, and secured a third in the span of seconds. One of the terrorists reached for a detonator. Jake shot it out of his hand with a weapon he'd acquired somewhere. The terrorist screamed and dove for it. Jake was faster, kicking the device away and restraining the terrorist in a hold that looked effortless, but Seraph knew was incredibly effective. Within 90 seconds, it was over. All 10 terrorists were subdued. 0 hostage casualties. 2 minor injuries among the rescue team. War Chief Draknor stood up from where he'd been held, his massive frame unharmed. He looked at Jake with an expression Seraph was beginning to recognize. Respect. Deep, genuine respect. "You came for us," Draknor said. "Of course," Jake replied, as if there had never been any other option. "Couldn't let anything happen to my favorite negotiating partner." Draknor laughed, a deep rumbling sound. "You are strange, Morrison human. You fight like apex predator, but you protect like prey guardian. What are you?" Jake smiled. "Just someone trying to keep the peace." Medical teams arrived to treat the hostages. Station security took the terrorists into custody. Jake coordinated everything, making sure every detail was handled properly. Seraph watched one of the terrorists spit at Jake as they dragged him past. "You're a traitor to prey species everywhere. Helping those monsters. Those killers." Jake looked at the terrorist with something like pity. "They're not monsters. They're people, just like you. The difference is, they're learning to build instead of destroy. You should try it sometime." After everything was secured, Jake finally allowed a medic to look at him. He'd taken a hit during the rescue. A deep cut along his ribs from a terrorist's blade. The medic cleaned and bandaged the wound while Jake continued coordinating the aftermath. Seraph found herself standing next to Krelix, who had arrived after hearing about the incident. "Your humans saved many lives today," Krelix rumbled. "Including lives of my people." "He's not my human," Seraph said automatically, then wondered why she'd felt the need to clarify that. "He should be someone's human," Krelix said. "Humans are pack creatures. Morrison human is strong but lonely. I see this." The massive Thronax turned his head to look at Seraph. "You watch him much. You are interested." "I'm curious about what he really is," Seraph said. "He is bridge," Krelix said simply. "He is the path between predator and prey, between war and peace. He is what humans call hope. Rare thing in galaxy." A young Thronax approached, and Seraph recognized him as Rax Thor, Krelix's son. The young warrior looked at Jake with open admiration. "Father, can I speak with Morrison human?" Raxthor asked. "Go," Krelix agreed. Seraph watched as Raxthor approached Jake nervously. Jake looked up, smiled, and gestured for the young Thronax to sit. They talked for several minutes, Jake clearly answering questions and offering advice. 5 years ago," Krelix said to Seraph, "my clan was trapped on Death Moon by enemy force. We fought hard, but we were losing. Morrison human came with small team. He could have left us to die, could have claimed our territory for humanity. Instead, he fought beside us. He bled with us. He saved my son's life." Krelix's voice became softer, which for a Thronax was still quite loud. "After battle, I asked him why. Why help us? We were enemies to humanity then. He said something I never forget. He said, 'Because it was the right thing to do. Because your son deserves to grow up with his father. Because maybe if I help you today, you'll help someone else tomorrow.'" The massive warrior looked at Seraph with his predatory eyes. "That is when I understood. Morrison human is not prey pretending to be predator. He is predator who chooses kindness. Most dangerous thing in galaxy is strong creature that controls its strength." Those words echoed in Seraph's mind as she watched Jake finish his debriefing with station security. He was exhausted. She could see that. The wound in his side had to hurt, though he showed no sign of it. But he kept going, making sure everyone was safe, everyone was cared for. Captain Lisa Grant approached him, spoke quietly. Jake shook his head at something she said, then finally nodded. They walked together toward the human delegation quarters. Seraph realized something in that moment. She'd spent her whole life being taught that strength meant power, that respect came from dominance. But Jake Morrison had shown her something different. He had power but chose not to display it. He commanded respect not through dominance, but through action. He was strong enough to be kind, powerful enough to be gentle, and somehow, that made him more impressive than any apex predator she'd ever met. Later that evening, Seraph sent a formal request through diplomatic channels. She wanted to speak with Jake Morrison privately, not as an investigation, not as an interrogation. As someone who wanted to understand, the message came back within an hour. Jake agreed to meet her in one of the station's private conference rooms. When Seraph arrived, she found him already there, looking out the window at the stars. He'd changed clothes, and the wound on his side was properly bandaged, but she could see the exhaustion in his posture. "Thank you for meeting me," Seraph said as she entered. Jake turned and gave her a small smile. "Of course. Though, I have to admit, I'm curious why a princess wants to talk to a fake apprentice technician." Seraph sat down at the table, and Jake joined her. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then Seraph asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why do you pretend to be less than you are?" Jake leaned back in his chair, considering his answer. "It's not about being less. It's about being underestimated. When people think you're not important, they relax around you. They say things they wouldn't say otherwise. They don't feel threatened, so they don't get defensive. But you're important," Seraph insisted. "Why hide it?" "Because the moment everyone knows what I can do, I become a target," Jake explained. "I become someone to challenge, someone to test themselves against. Apex predators respect strength, but they also feel compelled to measure themselves against it. If I walk into a room as Commander Morrison, war hero, first contact specialist, suddenly every warrior there wants to prove they're stronger." He gestured to the window, to the vast expanse of space beyond. "But, if I'm just Jake, the friendly technician who fixes things, then I can actually talk to people. I can build relationships. I can find peaceful solutions before pride and honor demand violence." "That seems like a heavy burden," Seraph said softly. "It is," Jake admitted. "Some days, I'm tired of pretending. Tired of being underestimated on purpose. Tired of letting people think humans are harmless." He looked at her directly. "But then I remember what's at stake. Every war I prevent. Every alliance I help build. Every life saved. Because I was willing to look weak." Seraph thought about her own life. Always needing to display her power, her status, her importance. "I've never had the luxury of being underestimated. I've always had to prove I'm worthy of my position." "Different challenges," Jake said. "You have to constantly prove your strength to maintain respect. I have to hide mine to earn trust. Both are exhausting in their own ways." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Seraph asked, "What you said to Drak Nor during the negotiations? The sacred Krigon texts. How did you learn those?" Jake's expression became distant, remembering. 3 years ago, I was on a Krigon colony world. There was a war brewing between 2 Krigon clans over honor and territory. I spent 6 months there, living with both clans, learning their ways. An elder warrior named Korvash taught me the ancient tongue and the old texts. "Why would he teach an outsider?" Seraph asked. "Because I asked," Jake said simply. "Because I showed genuine interest in their culture. Because I respected their traditions instead of dismissing them as primitive." He smiled. "And because I beat him at their strategy game 3 times in a row, which he found amusing." Seraph found herself laughing. The image of Jake casually defeating a Krigon warrior at strategy was both absurd and somehow perfectly fitting. "The Liberation Front terrorists," Seraph said, her tone becoming serious. "One called you a traitor. Do you ever feel that way? Like you're betraying your own species by helping apex predators?" Jake shook his head firmly. "No, Because I'm not choosing them over humanity. I'm choosing peace over war. I'm choosing understanding over fear. He leaned forward. Humans survived on Earth not because we were the strongest or fastest. We survived because we learned to cooperate, to understand other species, to adapt. That's our real strength. Is that why apex predators respect you? Seraph asked. Maybe, Jake said. Most apex predator species evolved at the top of their food chains. They never had to develop the same level of social complexity that humans did. We had to compete with wolves, big cats, bears, and dozens of other predators. We had to cooperate on a level most species didn't need to. He stood and walked to the window. When a Thronax looks at me, they see a predator who doesn't challenge them directly. When a Krygon looks at me, they see a warrior who fights smart instead of hard. When any apex predator looks at me, they see something that fits their worldview, but also challenges it. That creates respect. Seraph joined him at the window. And when I look at you, what should I see? Jake turned to her, and in his eyes, she saw depth she hadn't noticed before. You should see someone who's tired, but won't stop. Someone who believes in peace, but knows how to fight. Someone who represents humanity's hope that we can find our place in the galaxy without becoming monsters or victims. You're more than just a bridge, Seraph said. You're proof that strength and kindness can exist together. That's what I hope for, Jake said quietly. That's what humanity hopes for. That we can show the galaxy there's another way. The next day, the council reconvened for the final negotiation session. This time, Jake sat at the table, not as an observer, but as an official participant. His cover was completely blown, but that seemed to work in everyone's favor. War Chief Draknor presented a proposal that incorporated many of Jake's suggestions from before. The disputed territories would be shared, with specific zones allocated based on each species' needs. Resource extraction would be cooperative rather than competitive. Defense of the sector would be a joint responsibility. Other species added their own conditions and modifications. Jake facilitated the discussion, helping translate not just languages, but cultural concepts and values. When the Thronax representative bristled at what seemed like an insult from the Valkyrian delegation, Jake explained the cultural context that showed it was actually a compliment. When the Slith diplomat tried to add hidden clauses that would give them unfair advantage, Jake politely but firmly pointed them out and suggested fairer alternatives. After hours of negotiation, a treaty was drafted. Every species had compromised. No one got everything they wanted, but everyone got something they could accept. As delegates signed the treaty, Seraph watched Jake. He looked exhausted but satisfied. This was what he lived for, she realized. These moments when war became peace, when enemies became allies, when understanding triumphed over violence. After the signing ceremony, there was a celebration. Different species mingled, sharing food and drink, talking about the future rather than past conflicts. Seraph noticed how many delegates approached Jake, thanking him, offering respect, inviting him to visit their worlds. Krelix approached with his son Rax Thor. The young Thronax bowed to Jake in the traditional warrior greeting. Morrison Human, my son wishes to ask you something, Krelix said. Rax Thor stepped forward, nervous but determined. Jake looked surprised and honored. I would be honored to share what I know. Though I should warn you, it's mostly just learning to listen and understanding that everyone has their own perspective. That is what I wish to learn, Rax Thor said. How to see through others' eyes. War Chief Draknor also approached. The Krygon Dominion extends invitation to Morrison Human. Visit our homeworld. Meet our people. You have earned this honor. Krygon.ming. 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 I'd like that, Jake said. Thank you, War Chief. Seraph felt a strange emotion as she watched these exchanges. It took her a moment to identify it. Pride. She was proud of Jake, proud of what he'd accomplished. proud of what he represented. Later, as the celebration wound down, Seraph found Jake alone again, standing in an observation area. She joined him without saying anything at first. "You're returning to your empire soon," Jake said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Seraph confirmed. "My father has summoned me. He wants to hear my full report on the summit." "What will you tell him?" Jake asked. Seraph thought carefully before answering. "I'll tell him that I learned something important here. That strength isn't always about power. That the most dangerous predators are the ones secure enough to show restraint." She paused. "I'll tell him about a human who taught me that being underestimated can be a choice, not a weakness." Jake smiled. "That's kind of you to say." "It's the truth," Seraph insisted. She turned to face him fully. "I came here thinking I understood the galaxy, thinking I knew what strength meant, what power meant. You showed me I was wrong." "You weren't wrong," Jake said gently. "You just had an incomplete picture. We all do. That's why dialogue matters. That's why people like us need to keep building bridges." "People like us," Seraph repeated. "You see me as a bridge builder?" "I see you as someone who's willing to learn and change," Jake said. "That's the first step. The fact that you investigated me, questioned your assumptions, and came to talk to me directly, instead of just dismissing me, that shows wisdom." Seraph felt something warm in her chest at his words. "If I need advice in the future about dealing with apex predators or first contact situations, could I contact you?" "Any time," Jake promised. "That's what I'm here for." Months passed. Seraph returned to her empire and found herself thinking often about the lessons she'd learned at the summit. When faced with aggressive species on their borders, she applied Jake's principles. When her advisors recommended shows of force, she instead suggested dialogue and understanding. It worked more often than not. The Valkyrian Empire's reputation began to shift from fearsome power to respected wisdom. Seraph's father noticed the change and praised her growth as a leader. Then came a new crisis. A species called the Zorkath had been discovered at the edge of Valkyrian space. They were aggressive, technologically advanced, and clearly apex predators. Early encounters had been hostile. War seemed inevitable. Seraph's military advisors recommended assembling a fleet to intimidate the Zorkath into submission. Her father was inclined to agree. But Seraph remembered Jake's words about strength and restraint. She made a request through the Galactic Council. Would civilian specialist Jake Morrison be available for consultation? Jake arrived 2 weeks later. When Seraph saw him step off the transport, she felt a genuine smile cross her face. He looked the same as before, dressed in simple clothes, carrying a worn bag, looking like nothing special. But she knew better now. She knew what he really was. "Princess Seraph," Jake greeted her warmly. "It's good to see you again." "Jake," she replied, using his first name comfortably now. "Thank you for coming." They walked together through her palace, and Seraph briefed him on the Zorkath situation. Jake listened carefully, asking questions, taking mental notes. "So what do you think?" Seraph asked when she finished. "Can we avoid war?" Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "I'd like to meet them, talk to them, learn about their culture, and what they want." He smiled that familiar smile. "It's amazing how many wars can be avoided if you just take time to understand the other side." "My father wants a show of strength," Seraph admitted. "Then show strength through wisdom," Jake suggested. "Show them that Valkyria is strong enough to offer peace instead of demanding submission. That's the strength that lasts." Together, they planned an approach. Not a military fleet, but a small diplomatic vessel. Not demands, but dialogue. Not intimidation, but genuine interest in understanding the Zorkath. When they met the Zorkath leaders, Jake did what he did best. He listened. He learned. He found common ground. And slowly, carefully, he built a bridge between two species that had seemed destined for conflict. Seraph watched him work, and she found herself learning new techniques, new approaches, new ways of thinking about problems. She participated in the negotiations, applying everything Jake had taught her, everything she'd learned from watching him. After 3 weeks of intense negotiation, they achieved what many thought impossible. The Zorkath agreed to peaceful coexistence. Trade agreements were drafted, cultural exchanges were planned, war was averted. On the last night before Jake returned to human space, Seraph invited him to walk in her palace gardens. The twin moons of her homeworld cast silver light over the carefully maintained plants. "You've done well," Jake said as they walked. "The way you handled the negotiations, the respect you showed the Zorkath while still maintaining your authority. That was impressive." "I had a good teacher," Seraph replied. "Even if he pretended to be just an apprentice." Jake laughed. "That cover story is pretty much dead now, isn't it?" "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Seraph suggested. "Maybe the galaxy needs to see what humans really are." "Maybe," Jake agreed. "Though I think I'll keep being underestimated for a while longer. It still has its advantages." Rate 1. I maybe underestimated. I decepti. They reached a quiet spot overlooking a reflecting pool. Seraph turned to face him. "Jake Morrison, I want you to know something. You changed how I see the galaxy. You changed how I see leadership, strength, and what it means to be powerful. Thank you for that." Jake looked genuinely touched. "You're welcome, Princess. But really, you just learned to see what was always there. The potential for peace exists in almost every conflict. Sometimes people just need someone to point it out." "Will you come back?" Seraph asked. "When we need your wisdom again?" "Whenever you call," Jake promised. "That's what friends do. Friends." Seraph realized that's what they'd become. A human bridge builder. And a Valkyrian princess. An unlikely friendship, but a real one. As Jake's ship departed the next day, Seraph stood on the palace landing platform, watching it rise into the sky. Her advisor, Elder Miranda, joined her. "You have learned much from the human," Miranda observed. "I have," Seraph agreed. "I learned that the most dangerous predators are the ones who don't need to prove it. I learned that strength without wisdom is just violence. I learned that being underestimated can be a choice, and sometimes, the best choice." "And what will you do with these lessons?" Miranda asked. Seraph watched Jake's ship disappear among the stars. "I'll use them to make our empire better. Stronger not through fear, but through respect. Powerful not through domination, but through wisdom." "That is good," Miranda said. "That is how true apex predators behave. They are secure in their strength, so they don't need to constantly display it." As they walked back to the palace, Seraph thought about Jake's words. When you're secure in your own power, you don't need everyone else to acknowledge it constantly. She understood now. Real power was quiet. Real strength was restrained. Real leadership was about building up others, not tearing them down. Jake Morrison had appeared to be just an apprentice. But he had taught a princess lessons about power that all her royal training had never covered. He had shown an empire a better way to interact with the galaxy, and in doing so, he had proven what humanity could be. Not the strongest species, not the most advanced, not the most feared, but perhaps the most needed. The bridge builders, the peacemakers, the ones who understood that the highest form of strength was knowing when not to use it. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, Jake Morrison was probably already heading to his next assignment. Another conflict to resolve, another war to prevent, another bridge to build, and whenever the galaxy needed him, he would be there, looking like nothing special, acting like just another technician, until the moment came when apex predators needed to step back, and they would, because they recognized one of their own. A different kind of predator. The most dangerous kind. The kind that chose peace.